Okay, let's get started. Welcome, everybody. My name is Franco Montalto. I'm a professor here at Drexel University in the College of Engineering and one of the hosts of this, the June 2021 Green Infrastructure, Climate, and Cities seminar series. And you can see our partners and collaborators here on the bottom banner. For those of you who may be joining us for the first time, this is a monthly seminar series that focuses broadly on these topics that we've been doing since 2014 on the first Wednesday of every month. Over the past year or so, it's been on Zoom. All of our previous presentations are archived on the ccrun.org website. You can go download them and watch them at your pleasure. This one is also being recorded and will be posted there. During the presentation, we ask that you use the Q&A box to submit questions to our speakers. And as you can see there, you can upvote comments upvote questions that have been asked by others. And you can also raise your hand to ask questions verbally. Today, we will do questions in between each of our speakers, and then we'll have some time at the end for a joint conversation. The chat should be reserved just for comments to us, problems that have to do with using the some of the logistics. But please don't put your questions in the chat, put them in the Q&A. Today is the third in a sequence and a mini series of presentations that have been focusing on resources, tools, and methods for preparing for climate change. So back in March, we had some folks from New York, from Season and other collaborators presenting. In May, we had some folks from NRCC presenting. And today we have a presentation from Dvrpc. And the title of today's presentation is Understanding, Communicating, and Addressing the Climate Change Issues in Municipalities. As we have been doing over the past year, we sort of begin this series underscoring the fact that we are inhabiting the land of the Lenape peoples, and we hope that this discussion, as well as all of our discussions, helps us to inspire dialogue about how to better treat this land. And we acknowledge the acknowledgement here from the Lenape Center. Due to centuries of colonialism perpetuated by genocide, forced displacement, and systemic oppression, the Lenape diaspora is dispersed throughout the US and Canada, and we hope to show the same care that they have for this land. So today's topic, as I said, is understanding, communicating, and addressing climate change. We have three speakers: Robert Graff, Adam Bean, and Amy Verbofsky. And what I'll do is just read some quick bios of each of our speakers, and then I'll hand it over to Rob, and they will tag team on the presentation. So Rob Graff manages the Office of Energy and Climate Change Initiatives for the Delaware Valley Regional Planning Commission, Dvrpc, the Metropolitan Planning Organization and Regional Planning Forum for the 9 counties and 5.5 million people of Greater Philadelphia. Mr. Graff develops and guides initiatives to reduce energy use and greenhouse gas emissions and to prepare the region for long-term impacts of a changing climate. Mr. Graff represents Dvrpc's regional perspective on numerous efforts related to energy and climate change issues, including at the National Academy of Sciences, Engineering and Medicine's Transportation Research Board, Standing Committee on Extreme Weather and Climate Change Adaptation. Our second speaker is Adam Bean, who's a senior research analyst in the Office of Energy and Climate Change Initiatives at Dvrpc. During his 6 years at the organization, Adam has worked on a wide variety of projects designed to assist communities in reducing their greenhouse gas emissions while preparing to adapt to the effects of climate change. And these projects have included preparing Dvrpc's 2015 energy use and greenhouse gas inventory, providing technical assistance to municipalities on best practices for solar photovoltaics and electric vehicles, and authoring Dvrpc's forthcoming municipal implementation tool entitled Municipal Management of Extreme Heat. And our third speaker is Amy Verbofsky, who is the manager of Healthy and Resilient Communities at the Dvrpc. In this role, she convenes Dvrpc's Healthy Communities Task Force and partners with communities and stakeholders to develop food systems and healthy community-related studies, such as the Camden Health Element and Eat Local, Montgomery County's local food promotion strategy. Amy also supports Dvrpc's environmental planning work, including administering the Coastal Zone Management Program within the Delaware Estuary Coastal Zone and creating the coastal effects of climate change in Southeastern PA story map. So with that, I'd like to introduce our team, welcome our team from DVRPC, and I will hand it over to Rob.
Great, thank you, Franco. It's a pleasure. As you noted, I have been, DVRPC has been participating in enjoying these forums for years, and it's sort of an honor to be able to speak at it. I guess you must have run out of the better speakers by now. DVRPC is not an academic institution. We make use of a lot of work from academic institutions. So this is more on the practitioner side than the research side largely. And it's sort of how we take the information that we get from attending the great webinars and meetings back when they used to be in person that CC Run has put together, and all the other events that we attend, and the documents we research and bring them to practice in our region. So today, my colleagues, Amy Verbofsky, Adam Beam, and I will tell you about several tools that DVRPC has developed to help municipal leaders and others in the region understand and begin to address climate change. So just to let you know who we are, the DVRPC is the Metropolitan Planning Organization for the Greater Philadelphia region, created in 1965. We are named after the Delaware Valley, which is the river that runs between Pennsylvania and New Jersey and forms the border. We ideally should be named the Greater Philadelphia Metropolitan Planning Organization, but that's difficult to get New Jersey to agree to a name like that. So a lot of people think we have something to do with the state of Delaware, which we do not. We certainly cooperate with them in activities, but our authority, such as it is, does not go into New Jersey. So into Delaware. Our board is made up of representatives of the counties and the cities, and both governors of the states serve on our board through their representatives. We're very fortunate to be one of the larger metropolitan planning organizations in the country, with about 120 people, which means we can do a range of activities. Primarily, our core reason for existing is transportation. The idea is that it's our responsibility of the commission to develop a transportation system for the region that comports with the long-range needs of the region in all sorts of areas, including air quality, environmental issues such as smart growth, environmental planning, housing and economic development, population employment, and we do a lot of work. And about 13 years ago, 14 years ago, the Office of Energy and Climate Change Initiatives was established to understand and advance policies to both reduce greenhouse gas emissions and prepare the region for the long-term impacts of the climate change that's inevitable to our region. So very briefly, I'm going to talk about two tools that we have. One is on municipal management and a changing climate, which I'll explain in a bit, and then something we call the game of extremes, which we've run a couple times to educate municipalities. Adam is going to talk about a just published municipal management of extreme heat publication. And then Amy Verbofsky, I believe, will be talking about coastal effects of climate change in Southeastern Pennsylvania, showing you a live demonstration of a tool, assuming the internet cooperates with that. So, the story about climate change in our region and in the world is that it's happening. I mean, it's not something that we can pretend it doesn't exist. So we produced we produced this publication. It's in a series. This was the 31st in this series of what we call municipal implementation tools. In normal work, in a normal world, these are they're like 8.5 by 11 piece of paper folded in half. So they're a 5.5 by 8.5 brochure, very handy to refer to, very nicely illustrated to make them easy to understand. And we send them out to all the municipalities in our region. Recently, we haven't been able to do that, of course, because even if we sent them out, they would end up sitting in someone's mailbox at an office. But we have a number of these, and what Adam will be talking about was just released as number 33. So what the idea of this was to create a tool that would provide education on climate change to municipalities, both the historic and projected changes to the climate in Greater Philadelphia, how those changes are expected to affect the region, and then what municipal operational changes might they want to consider to best serve their residents and businesses. It's based on the climate science. The primary source of it was the Climate Science Special Report. This is on the historic and projected climate, and the NOAA's National Center for Environmental Information, which used to be called the National Climatic Data Center and may be called that again if the current administration changes the name back. And then the U.S. Department of Transportation has a climate data processing tool for the coupled model intercomparison product, which takes the climate projections for from a large number of models and allows you to process it down to a regional level, a 1/8 degree square area. And generally, you know, as Philadelphia, this work follows some work that the Philadelphia Office of Mayor's Office of Sustainability did back in 2015, and that the forecast for Philadelphia's future climate is going to be warmer and wetter, and that'll come in, a lot of them will be more concentrated in particular heat waves and heavy precipitation events. And we saw this and thought we should bring this to the region as a whole. And, you know, the Climate Science Special Report, as I noted, basically says that climate change is real, it's caused by humans, and it's serious, and the window of time to prevent widespread dangerous impact is closing very fast. So this is a serious issue. This is my 2-slide, what climate changes why climate change happens. So the Earth's temperature is warmer than the cold space that surrounds it. The atmosphere moderates the heat, holds in some of the heat and moderates the temperature between night and day. So think of being in a cold room. If you have the right blanket on, you'll be comfortable. The blanket for the Earth is made of greenhouse gases, primarily carbon dioxide. And the higher the concentration of greenhouse gases, the thicker the blanket gets and the warmer the Earth's surface gets. So in this illustration, the level of water in a bathtub essentially represents the thickness of a blanket. You can see the major sources of carbon dioxide above the bathtub. Before humans started burning fossil fuels to heat our homes, generate electricity, move vehicles, cook food, make steel, etc., the concentration of carbon dioxide stayed below that yellow line of 299 parts per million. But our life and society developed in the temperature range when a blanket of this thickness was provided. What we chose to, what crops we chose to plant where to locate cities, and the forest mixtures appropriate for that climate arose. And the system was largely in very good balance until about the mid-1800s, and the blanket got thicker and the Earth started to warm. When this, I guess this was, I put this together a couple of years ago. So at that time, the CO2 concentration in the atmosphere was about 411 parts per million. I don't know what it is today, but it's certainly a little higher than that. And our ocean's ability, so the reason there's more carbon going in than's coming out, and it comes out and goes into plants and soil and the oceans, but both of those are slowing down the amount of carbon they can uptake, because the carbon is, the forests are cleared and the ocean's getting saturated. So as a result, this is what's happened both to annual emissions. Annual emissions are on the right-hand side of this graph. That's the pink line. And then the concentration in the atmosphere is in the, or I guess the pink line is the concentration of carbon in the atmosphere, and then the blue line is how much is emitted per year. So you can see we're emitting more and more each year, and not surprisingly, the amount in the atmosphere goes up. So as a result, this is the average global temperature since between 1880 and 2020 has increased significantly. As you can see, there seems to be a pattern here. And also within our region, the same temperature trend is shown. So obviously, because it's regional, it's a little more scattered, but there's a clear trend as a 30-year moving average. Precipitation has not changed overall very much. It's a slight increase, but it's not a really strong trend in our region. But there is a trend for more intense storms, a higher percentage of the rain coming in intense storms over the period of time. So that's the past up till now, and our current global temperature is just over 1 degree Fahrenheit above the global average for 1960 to 2000. The future shows continued warming. Even if we were to stop emitting all greenhouse gases today, we would see another ½ degree or so. That's what the bottom line here indicates. That's if you did not have any greenhouse gas emissions. But the future temperatures depend on what the we know that emissions are likely to continue and drive the temperature higher. Future global temperatures depend on future greenhouse gas emissions, and future emissions depend on human choices, activities, and technological change, all of which are really difficult to predict. So we used 2 different scenarios in our analysis. The optimistic scenario here represents achieving a stable greenhouse gas concentration in the atmosphere by 2100, which requires emissions to peak in 2040. That is not that far away. 2040 is 18 years from now, and decline rapidly after that. So this is the optimistic. The pessimistic scenario represents emissions peaking in 2100. So as you can see, there's a big difference between what happens if we manage to reduce greenhouse gas emissions significantly or not in how much the global temperature will change. And the average annual temperature in Philadelphia, the red represents the pessimistic scenario and the blue represents the optimistic scenario. It's going to, you can see that by, shortly it's going to be about 3 degrees above the current temperature by the middle of the century, and then about 8 degrees higher by the end of the century under the pessimistic scenario. And this is a little bit complicated, but give me a moment to express this. This is based on, Adam will talk about this a little bit more in his presentation. This shows the number of days with a heat index over 90 degrees, 100 degrees, and 105 degrees Fahrenheit that our region has seen historically and what we're projected to see. So you can see the this bar here represents the days over 105. This is the days over 100, and this is the days over per year over 90 degrees. And then by the mid-century, depending on how successful the world is in reducing greenhouse gas emissions, the region will average somewhere between 50 and 70 days of, or 57 and 67 days with a heat index over 90, a 2 to 2.5% increase over the historical. 20 to 28 days with a heat index over 100, that's almost a month, a 5 to 7-fold increase, and a 9 to 16 days with a heat index over 105, which is a massive increase. It's 2 weeks almost over 100, 105. And then, of course, by the end of the century, we would expect 2 to 3 months of the year to have a heat index over 90, almost a 4-fold increase over the base, and another 1 to 2 months with a heat index over 100. Sorry, it would be a subset of this. 6 to 14 fold increase, and then 2 to 5 weeks a year with a heat index over 105. So this is temperature plus humidity, but it's projected to get hotter even under the optimistic, significantly hotter even under the optimistic scenario. And if we don't start doing things quickly, it's going to get a lot worse. Another issue is hot summer nights without air conditioning. Life will become increasingly unbearable, not being able to sleep at night when you have 60 or 70 days a year over 70 degrees at night. And it also doesn't allow air conditioning systems to have downtime, so they will tend to wear out more quickly, and people's cooling bills are likely to be pretty high. Total annual precipitation is expected to slightly increase under both optimistic and pessimistic scenarios. Precipitation is among the more difficult modeling phenomena, weather phenomena, climate phenomena to model. But there is, in both scenarios, most of the added precipitation is expected to fall in the winter, which will either be winter snowstorms or winter rainfall, and in the mid and in the summer, with a little bit of less in the fall and in the spring. There's a change in cooling requirements. Will be a significant increase in the amount of cooling degree days, which is a measure of how much you're going to need to have air conditioning on if you cool air, which most commercial buildings, almost all commercial buildings do, and many homes. And there's a little bit of good news, I guess, is that heating bills are projected to decrease slightly over time because the winters will not need as much heat. And then sea level rise, which Amy will be talking about a little bit, has three sources really. In addition to warmer temperatures, ocean currents can change, and then land can rise or fall. Warming temperatures cause several changes as well. Water expands as it gets warmer, and when land ice melts, it raises the level of the oceans. Also, the impact of climate change on ocean currents is very complex, but it appears that together these changes will exacerbate sea level rise, particularly in our region. Also, increased sea levels result in a storm surge associated with coastal storms going further inland. And then, not all coastal challenges are due to sea level rise. We've built a lot on barrier islands and coastlines, and those coastlines have always changed in response to storms and wave action. Amy will talk a lot more about this in her presentation, but we've had about a foot of sea level rise since 1900 in the Delaware estuary, and by 2100, it will be probably 3 to 4 feet above the 1900 level. 3 feet with no additional greenhouse gas emissions and 4 feet with a pessimistic scenario. This sea level rise is sort of a slow thing to respond because it takes a while to heat up the ocean and it takes a long time to melt land ice shelves. So what can we do about this? There's sort of three possible responses for us as governments. Reduce emissions was one. Can't eliminate climate change, but it can slow it and reduce it significantly. Prepare for projected changes by making things more resilient, adapting what we do have, and transforming places that are not able to be continue to be used with under future climate scenarios, such as say skiways in the Poconos. And then societies, and then also care for those who are suffering, acknowledging that they'll be suffering and prepare to ameliorate it through some of the issues that Adam will be talking about in his work on extreme heat. So we're going to talk in this about preparing for protected, the rest of this is on talking about protected changes through making systems more resilient, adapting to future conditions, and transforming the way we operate. But it's important to take action, to become resilient to today's risks, to increase the resilience to the risks that are increasing, and to use really, we have some rigorous quantitative climate projections available to us now to prepare for risks that are projected to increase. So as you think about the long-term future, what do you need to think about now as you enter that? One is to prepare for municipalities, to prepare your heating and air conditioning systems for the life of the investment. That is, you're going to need more cooling and less heating, so make your ducts a little bigger and your electrical supply to the equipment bigger, so if you need to replace the equipment as it gets warmer. Drainage requirements from buildings, recreation fields, and lots is likely to increase. So for municipalities, places that have problems today will only get worse. Gutters and downspouts and swales all should be sort of increased in size. Green stormwater infrastructure is really important. I know there've been some work on that in the series of lectures to sort of prevent stormwater. Make sure you have lots of shade in your municipal recreation facilities, both trees and sort of shelters, for people watching baseball games or whatever. Make sure you have water fountains. Playing surfaces might need to be redesigned in mind of temperature and rain. And the hours of use may need to be adjusted to cooler times. So if you currently have Saturday afternoon baseball games or softball games, you might need to move them to Saturday evening and maybe require lights at some of your playing fields. And as a general guidance, don't build things today that are not designed for the conditions they're expected to face over their design life. So if you think something's going to last for 50 years, be sure you design it for as much as you can tell what the world 50 years from now is going to be like. Stormwater systems will be challenged to handle the more intense rainfall. Particularly important that inlets and outfalls are kept clear of debris, retention basins, riparian corridor protection. Green stormwater infrastructure, as I noted, reduces flow, effectively increasing the capacity of the stormwater system. And when a municipality reviews plans for new development or redevelopment, future rainfall projections should be kept in mind in looking at designs. Intense storms cause waterways to flow faster with greater volume. Bridges, culvert, and other infrastructure were designed for historic storms, thus are in many cases no longer adequate for current and future storms. In addition to assuring that culverts and passages under bridges are kept clear of debris, municipalities should, when they replace them, assure that their bridges and culverts and other infrastructure are designed for future storms rather than simply replacing in kind. Paved surface temperatures, as Adam will note, can be much higher than air temperature, and they can buckle and soften in very high temperatures. I'm sure you've all seen those intersections where the right turn lane is sort of all wavy from people turning in the hot weather. And as climate change proceeds, municipalities need to select appropriate pavement. I know that in some cases, municipalities have put in sort of a cement corner or to prevent that kind of thing from happening. Transit stops of all kinds, rail, bus, light rail should be provided with shade where at all feasible, and sidewalks and trails should be kept shady as well, so they could be used in warmer temperatures. The timing and method of some key municipal services may need to be reconsidered. In hotter summers, trash may need to be collected more frequently or earlier in the morning when it's cool. Foot patrol officers need to find ways to keep cool. So there may need to be some cooling, some places they can go and cool off. Or maybe they need to change the uniforms to have lighter clothing. Organized summer youth programs may need to have midday programming inside rather than outside. And summer street fairs may need to make sure they have cooling centers or to be moved to cooler times of the year. So rather than in August, have them in October. Employee contracts are another thing to look at. Work rules and working hours. In many cases, union contracts or general contracts with contractors may have a temperature limit for when people can work and work safely, and even some equipment may have challenges when it's 105 degrees out. So how do you change the work rules and the work hours for that? So these are things you need to consider going forward. And then this picture just makes everything feel cooler. Trees are really important. Public trees, they keep people and buildings cool in the summer. They're an important part of green stormwater infrastructure, and when properly planted, they can serve as windbreaks to reduce both heating and cooling needs as they reduce the air interchange. But as our climate changes, it's important to be sure that trees are planted suitable for the conditions they're projected to face over their lifetimes. The municipal implementation tool that I am talking about contains links to excellent resources on conducting a street tree survey and selecting trees for the projected future. Cooling centers, Adam will be talking about this a little bit, need to be opened. Education on vector-borne diseases, as we have an increasing number of vector-borne diseases with mosquitoes and so forth. And municipalities need to update their regulations worked with county planning offices to update state floodplain ordinances and zoning strategies to protect assets from flooding, for instance, requiring setbacks from rivers and streams, increasing base flood elevations for buildings, and requiring proper stormwater management. Municipalities in their floodplains are able to impose building requirements beyond code. So just a little bit more information about this publication, which I will be sure to put the link to in the chat. It's a resource for municipalities, and it links to we have links to county level charts for the projected changes. And there's a little bit of a discussion of coastal municipalities. I sort of left that out of this because Amy's going to be discussing that. We mailed a copy of this to every municipality in the region. It's also available online, and I can't believe I neglected to put the URL in here, but if you just Google municipal management in a changing climate, Dvrpc, it's almost certainly the first one. I'll try to put the link in the chat. We presented it at a number of venues, including together with FEMA at some hazard mitigation planning meetings in several counties that all sort of stopped because of COVID. Because one of the things we did was a role-playing exercise. This is the second thing I'm talking about. This will be very short, called the Game of Extremes, which was developed by the Urban Sustainability Directors Network. It uses a fictional town of Muggy Town, a waterfront community that's seeing impacts of climate change, particularly increased flooding due to sea level rise and increased precipitation. The leaders need to figure out how to invest limited resources to protect community assets. So this is a role-playing game where people sit around, I'll show you some slides of that, and spend a couple hours trying to figure out how to spend their resources. There's 19 defined assets. You can find them on here. There's a power plant, a wastewater treatment plant, a water treatment plant, a senior center, a hospital, fire and police services, daycare center, stadium, wetlands, a river walk, public schools, et cetera, et cetera. Sort of, looking at the kind of assets that any community is concerned about with climate change. And then each asset's described on a two-sided card. Participants are divided into teams of 10, and each team member is assigned a specific role. So here, for instance, is the card defining the role for the wastewater and water treatment plant manager. They take on that role, the identity, they give themselves a new name, and there's a public health department representative, a transportation planner, an emergency management and preparedness director, a mayor, the neighborhood association president, the power plant manager, local environmental organization, and a representative of the Chamber of Commerce. And there's people, each one is surrounded, each team is given a different scenario with the planning horizon of either 2030 or 2050 with a specified amount of flooding and temperature rise. And they're given a budget ranging from $5 to $14 million. So then we've run this exercise 5 or 6 times, and each time people get deeply engaged in their role. They work around the map and tape teams of 10. They put on a name tag with their new role and really get into their roles. They struggle to work against time with a limited budget to protect their town's assets. And it's very engaging activity. And at the end, after those 3 hours, the teams report out and just report out what sort of contentious discussions and decisions they had to make. And when it's completed, when we did this, we then went to FEMA. Then the FEMA staff and the county staff went through their hazard mitigation planning workshop. And one of the great things about this game is it requires everyone to be involved in planning hazard mitigation. The police, planners, public works folks, people who aren't involved in this, sort of gives them a context for this. So then on my last slide, if you go to Dvrpc Energy Climate, you'll be able to find the municipal management and changing climate. And then here is the URL for the Urban Sustainability Directors Network Game of Extremes. They're completely free and downloadable for your use. And that is all I have. Thank you for your time. I guess we have time for a few questions now, Franco.
Yep, that's great. Thanks, Rob.
Sure.
Great, comprehensive. You covered a lot of ground. just going backwards, I guess maybe you could stop sharing and we could have Adam start sharing. And in the meantime, I'll sort of feed you. One question was about rain gardens and green roofs. You talked a little bit about green infrastructure, but do you see a role for rain gardens and green roofs as part of climate adaptation for the region?
Absolutely, absolutely. There's not a lot. I could have mentioned more things, but yes, I mean, greening everything is useful, and green roofs and rain gardens are wonderful for a number of reasons. Rain gardens prevent a lot. I've sort of built my own swale in my backyard or between my side yard, sort of prevents the rainfall from going out to the street, and it soaks in and is absorbed by feed or waters plants, which prevents the stormwater going into the drains. It's sort of one of the key strategies of the city of Philadelphia in their Green City Clean Waters initiative. Green roofs, they're a little more challenging to maintain, I think, than a rain garden. They're certainly for larger buildings make a lot of sense, particularly. They also, in addition to absorbing stormwater, which in the city of Philadelphia can reduce your stormwater tax, they can also, if they're built correctly, they can provide additional insulation on the roofs of buildings to prevent the lower energy use. So yes, those are good strategies. One
other, more like a comment, but I'll turn it into a question in the chat. Just commenting on the photos, and sort of like how do you recruit people? Are you able? Do you find it easy to get a sort of representative and diverse crowd when you do these types of game activities, or is that challenging?
Well, the main audience for these are the county officials and the municipal officials, and we ask them to bring the people who are going to be involved in their county's hazard mitigation planning activity. We did this with the city of Philadelphia. We did it with Bucks County. We did it with a group of high school students in Camden. We did it with Montgomery County. We did it with, we're going to do it in Bucks County, in Chester County. So what we've been working with are the officials. So if the officials of the municipality and the counties are not a diverse group, or they don't recruit a diverse group, then they're not there. Our role in this is primarily to work with, in these things in the past, is to work with the counties who they want to have at these meetings. We encourage them to bring in business community as well and other interested citizens. There is a role in the game of the advocate for an environmental justice organization, but it's it's challenging to get people to take time off work. So this is primarily done as paid employees of counties and municipalities who are attending this meeting as part of a hazard mitigation exercise. We've done it in some evening events as well, and we're willing to do it run it anywhere. So if any group has some, we were just getting started on setting it up when March 13th happened and everything closed down.
And last question, if you could answer real quick, so before we hand it over, just about urban agriculture. And I guess the spirit of the question is, with warming, more food production locally.
Yeah, I don't really know. It's hard to say what the future of urban agriculture is. I mean, it depends a lot on what the demand for using urban spaces for housing or business are compared to so as if people move back into cities more and more, the spaces that are currently used for urban agriculture will have other demands on them that may cause conflicts. It's important primarily, I think, for making people aware of how things grow and also for the stormwater services they can provide. But Amy may know more things about urban agriculture, and I'll just ask her. I'll defer that question to when she talks, if she has some thoughts on that. Unless she wants.
Thanks so much, Rob.
Sure enough, Mike.
Yeah. Oh no, sorry.
I mean, you're welcome. Thanks for letting me talk.
I didn't mean to.
I didn't
mean to rush you off. I just want to keep us on schedule, and looking forward to Adam's next presentation. So, Adam, take it away.
Sure. Thank you very much, Franco, for having us. And thanks, Rob, for that great overview of climate change in the Delaware Valley. I am here to talk to you about our newest implementation tool, which is the Municipal Management of Extreme Heat. It's a deeper dive into the issues with heat as we think about climate change in municipalities. And it's an offshoot of Rob's MIT Municipal Management and Changing Climate. So the reason we're taking a deep dive into heat specifically is because heat is the most lethal weather-related event, and that's even more than floods and hurricanes, but it doesn't always get much attention, especially in the hazard mitigation world. So we wanted this MIT to take a deeper dive into that and talk about what local governments can do to adapt to it. So over the course of this presentation, I'll give an overview of the state and causes of extreme heat, some of the impacts, and then some broad recommendations. And let's get to it. So what is extreme heat exactly? Well, the definition varies by region, but the CDC defines it as weather that is much hotter and or more humid than average for a particular time and place. So that humidity component can be very important. And as you probably noticed, even if the temperature reading outside is not super high, if the humidity is also high, then that heat feels very oppressive. So the National Weather Service's heat index gives a measure of the combination of heat and humidity. And it's essentially the feels like temperature. And the National Weather Service generally recommends a heat advisory when the heat index reaches 100 degrees Fahrenheit for 48 hours. So Rob already showed this, but we'll get into it a little bit. So what causes extreme heat? So it's sort of a combination of global and local factors. At the global level, as the concentration of carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases in the atmosphere increase, global average temperatures also increase. And according to NASA, 19 of the 20 warmest years on record have happened since 2001. So this is definitely a severe trend. And we also see that trend in our region. Again, this chart probably looks familiar after Rob's presentation, but note that 8 of the 10 hottest years on record in Greater Philadelphia have occurred in just the past 15 years. So another dire trend. And as we continue to emit greenhouse gases into the atmosphere through energy use, transportation, and more, we expect these trends to continue into the future. Rob went over the downscale climate projections that we used with an optimistic and a pessimistic scenario based on greenhouse gas emissions in the future. But you see, even with the blue optimistic scenario, we expect temperatures to increase. And that's almost if we stopped emissions today. So we're still going to see these impacts from heat. And with a more business as usual pessimistic scenario, temperatures are going to jump pretty high by the end of the century. And we're back to the heat index chart. So let's not forget that extreme heat is based on more than just temperature, but it's also humidity. And that combination is again known as the heat index. So this chart looks at how many days per year have a heat index above 90 degrees, 100 degrees, or 105 degrees. And as Rob mentioned, these bars range from a optimistic scenario or a pessimistic scenario with, if we don't stop emitting greenhouse gas emissions by the end of the century, we can expect, a quarter of the year over 90 degrees, the heat index almost 2 months above 100 degrees, and over a whole month could be over 105 degrees by the end of the century. So it's going to be pretty toasty. So in terms of local factors, an average increase in heat index won't affect everywhere equally, even in our region. So some areas are more susceptible to heat gain than others, and that's mostly due to geography, but also the heat island effect. So, this is where urban areas, because of their impervious surface coverage and a couple other things we'll talk about in just a second, are more prone to intense heat. So there are 4 major characteristics of urbanized areas that cause this. The first is loss of natural vegetation. So you'll see in this picture, there is no vegetation, and that's pretty common across a lot of our municipalities and urbanized areas, even in some rural communities. So trees and other vegetation provide shade from sunlight. They reduce, so thereby reducing surface temperatures, and they also cool ambient air temperatures by releasing water to the surrounding air, and that's known as evapotranspiration. So if you don't have trees or vegetation, you're losing 2 methods to reduce temperatures. The second factor is the construction materials used in urban areas. So those are typically dark and absorb and store more solar energy than lighter materials. And that energy is also stored longer, and it's released more slowly. So that keeps temperatures higher longer, even into the night. And the third is the geometry of urban areas. So this refers to the dimensions and spacing of buildings within a city. Urban geometry affects wind flow, energy absorption, and a given surface's ability to emit long wave radiation like heat back to space. So for example, developed areas typically have structures and surfaces that are often partially obstructed by objects like other buildings or vehicles. And these objects stop heat from readily escaping structures and surfaces, meaning that the heat's retained much longer than from other surfaces. And again, even into the night. So there'll be a lot more nights above 70 degrees in the future, which is not good for public health. Nighttime heat island, yeah. So as a general rule of thumb, the more difficult it is to see the sky, the more likely it is that the area's urban geometry will trap heat. And then finally, buildings and vehicles emit heat just, operating. So think air conditioning units or vehicle exhaust that you walk by, you might burn your leg a little bit even. So that all contributes to heating air temperatures in our communities. So Dvrpc completed an analysis to identify heat islands throughout the region. So we use satellite imagery pre-processed to provide us with surface temperatures. And I can provide a link to that if anyone's interested, the satellite imagery that we downloaded. But we found the 8 hottest, mostly cloud-free days over about a 5-year span. And then we smooth the images using raster image processing with ArcGIS or whichever geographic information system you have access to. And then found an average of those 8 hottest days. And then, we found an average for the total regional temperature, and then also averaged the temperatures to each census block. So we were able to find an average temperature for the census block and average temperature for the region. And we use that to find the difference between the two seen in this map. So the red areas denote the most intense heat islands. As you might expect, Philadelphia is pretty bright red. You can even see like the river and some of the parks in here show up as green. But for the most part, Philly's pretty red, but there's also red heat islands in every county in the region. Even out in Burlington County, we have some. And this is a lot of the pinelands, but there's still some urbanized areas that you see some bright red, and even out in agricultural Chester County as well. So they're pretty much in every county. And they're also between and within neighborhoods. So even within certain neighborhoods and urban areas, you might have green spaces like this park that show up as much cooler. And then, just more building density that provides more red, more hot. So that gives us some hope that we can, do something at the local level that will help mitigate some of this heat. All right, so why are we talking about heat? Well, it impacts our populations and infrastructure in many ways. So heat health risks range in intensity depending on heat index and other factors like age and underlying medical conditions. Sunstroke and heat cramps and heat exhaustion are all possible at 90 degrees. Heat index, which we saw could be over a quarter of the year. And that's for some of the, more at-risk groups like the elderly or people with underlying conditions. And then as you go up in heat index, even healthy adults can experience those symptoms. And even if you get high enough, heat stroke is even likely for just standing outside for too long for anyone. So in addition to just heat health risks, there's also air quality degradation. Air quality degrades more rapidly as temperatures go up, and this is mainly due to heat accelerating the formation of ground level ozone and other pollutants, which in turn can increase the asthma rates of our younger populations. And finally, extreme heat can also exacerbate inequality, and that's something we kind of hear in the climate change world. Like climate change just tends to exacerbate the problems that we're already facing as a society. So one of the things is, particularly for low-income residents, if they have to spend more of their income on energy, that impacts them more aggressively than it does today, because you'll need more air conditioning the hotter it is. And that's true also for racial and ethnic minority neighborhoods, as they're typically due to histories of redlining in areas with less access to green space. So extreme heat also impacts our transportation utility infrastructure. On high heat days, train tracks may warp from the heat, so trains have to slow down so as not to crash. I think I remember that a summer from a few years ago where some Amtrak trains were having trouble getting up here from DC during a heat wave. And SEPTA trains often have to slow down, and that causes problems for commuters in the summer. Airplanes also have a harder time attaining lift to get off the ground, so there could be delays at airports and things like that. And then some bridges can also buckle from the heat, so weight limits may need to be implemented during heat events. And then both water and electrical infrastructure may be overwhelmed during heat events as people use ice and cold water and air conditioning to stay cold. And as Rob mentioned, with the cooling degree days, that's likely to continue into the future. So again, this chart shows the percentage increase in the projected number of cooling degree days. And that essentially gives a measure of how hot an area is compared to a standard comfortable temperature, which is typically about 65 degrees. And then higher numbers of cooling degree days are related to higher levels of energy used for air conditioning. So projections here show that cooling degree days almost triple by the end of the century in the pessimistic scenario, which is a lot more energy used for air conditioning. And as we mentioned, air conditioning can contribute waste heat to the surrounding areas, so that could even exacerbate the already hot temperatures outside. So luckily, there are 3 key ways that we've identified that local governments can attack extreme heat. And the first is to recognize and identify the problem areas and those most at risk. And the second is to reduce temperatures as much as possible by mitigating heat islands. And the third is to prepare contingencies and adaptation methods for when extreme heat strikes. So for the first, we looked at census information to identify those vulnerable populations. We already covered the hotspots with our heat island analysis. But so we looked for those most vulnerable to heat to highlight in our analysis. That's the elderly, usually about 65 years of age or older, especially if they live alone. Children, typically under the age of 5. Low-income residents, those that are socially isolated, that may not realize it's getting as hot as it is, and it's pretty dangerous. Racial and ethnic minorities, again, they tend to be relegated to, historic communities tend to be relegated based on red lighting to areas without as much impervious, or areas with more impervious surface and less vegetation. Those with limited English proficiency or those in foreign-born populations may not have the skills or the access to typical educational materials and weather notifications warning of the impending heat waves. Underlying medical conditions are also a factor. So if you have a history of heart disease or a respiratory disease, even women who, I don't guess I should call this an underlying, I guess it is an underlying medical condition, but pregnant women also suffer more often than normal. And especially pregnant women who are Black tend to have more miscarriages when exposed to extreme heat than white women who are pregnant. So there's a lot going on. So let's look at what we had at Dvrpc, which is, as part of our environmental justice efforts, we have a team that puts together what is known as the indicators of potential disadvantage. And it provides a score at the census tract level for relative disadvantage based on percentage of residents belonging to the following groups, which is older adults over the age of 65, youth populations, females, racial minorities, ethnic minorities, foreign-born populations, those with limited English proficiency, those with disabilities, and those living in poverty. So a score is given to each census tract for each indicator based on its regional percentile, and then added together. And then the percentile is taken again to provide that total score that you see on the upper left. So a higher IPD score indicates more potentially disadvantaged census tracts. And these are the populations that are typically vulnerable to high temperatures. So we took these IPD scores and assigned them to give equal value with heat and combined them with our heat island analysis to see which census tracts were both potentially disadvantaged and exposed to high temperatures. And again, there are heat vulnerable census tracts in every part of the region. There's a high coincidence of potential disadvantage and heat exposure. Again, mostly in the core cities, but also even out in Chester County and Burlington County and things like that, Bucks County. We also have a variation of this vulnerability index available at the census block group using slightly different indicators, and that's due to data availability at the census block group level. So the indicators that we looked for were ethnic and racial minority populations, children under the age of 5, so we were able to get a little bit more specific, adults over the age of 65 and living alone, as they're more at risk, households with limited English proficiency, and then we also looked at household income. We weren't able to get any sort of health information or disability information at the census block group level, which is unfortunate, but expected. So then we can combine that with our heat island analysis at the census block group level to generate a more fine-grained heat vulnerability index. But you'll see, based on data availability, we are missing some block groups. So once municipalities found the most vulnerable areas to heat, municipalities can begin targeting interventions to counteract the heat island effect. So there are 4 broad interventions we've identified to do this. The first is planting more trees and vegetation. Provides shade, provides that evapotranspiration, also has several co-benefits, including stormwater management, and improves air quality. It also sequesters carbon dioxide, which can help reduce the overall cause of the increasing heat. And they also provide mental health benefits as well. Then we have cool roofs. So this is a reflective roofing material or coating. It's often white. Doesn't have to be. There's some colored reflective roof coatings now. And it also reduces energy costs in the summer. It does have the caveat though that if it gets cold in the winter, it can actually increase heating costs, but not by a whole lot. Philadelphia is pretty well known for the cool roof, as they were able to build that into their building code, that each new roof will have to have a reflective coating of some kind. So then there we have green roofs, and these are vegetative layers grown on rooftops. They combine the benefits of trees and vegetation as well as cool roofs, only they also provide more insulation than traditional roofs. And they keep buildings cool in the summer, and that extra insulation helps keep them warm in the winter as well. And that goes along with their air quality and CO2 sequestration benefits, as well as stormwater management. Then we have cool pavements. So you see in this picture that traditional asphalt gets very hot because it's a darker color in the direct sunlight, but cool pavements are more reflective. I think this picture is a coating that Phoenix is testing out in some of their streets. And you'll see that it does actually cool off the temperatures quite a bit, which helps decrease the formation of ground level ozone. And these can also be combined with permeable pavements to mitigate stormwater. It also increases safety by reducing slippage with water. But cool pavements themselves can also increase safety as they also increase visibility at night. Finally, if you just cool public spaces, that's also a great way to combat some of the effects of the heat islands. So as Rob mentioned, bus shelters or transit shelters to keep people cool. Shade structures. We've seen some communities install art installations that can help shade folks as they're walking around. And then also public pools and spray grounds can help keep children warm and others warm in the summer. So finally, we also want to look at preparing and adapting to the heat that we know is going to happen regardless of what we're able to do. As we saw in those projections, even an optimistic scenario, we're going to see some extreme heat. So the first thing to do is to forecast, monitor, and notify, and that's typically done through county public health offices. City of Philadelphia is very well known for this with their heat warning systems. And if I believe the National Weather Service works with counties on this as well to help make sure the notifications go through and everyone's ready for the heat wave. Then you want to do some education and awareness outreach. Usually this is done through public meetings or educational materials, email blasts, Facebook posts, that type of thing. And you want to inform your citizens prior to the first heat wave of the season, as the first heat wave is the deadliest. And if you do hold a public meeting, presumably after COVID times or maybe a Zoom public meeting, you just want to make sure that you discuss the dangers of extreme heat, potential risk factors that contribute to higher instances of heat health emergencies, what to look out for in terms of symptoms from heat exposure. So, if you need to get inside to cool off, recommended response and treatment, ways to stay up to date on weather forecasts and how to access heat wave notifications, and then information on utility programs for weatherization, air conditioning, bill pay assistance, or no cutoff programs for electricity during the summer. And then you'll also want to respond to heat waves. So ideally, responding to heat waves, you want to allow people to stay cool at home, and you also want to give them somewhere to go if it's too hot. So make sure you check your water and electrical infrastructure, make sure it's ready and can handle a heat wave, and the added load from the air conditioning and the water usage. You can institute resident buddy programs so that neighbors go and check on their other neighbors, especially if they're older or living alone, just to make sure that there's someone there to let them know that how to stay cool and where to go. You can also open cooling centers, which again, in times of COVID-19, can be a little bit difficult, but there are ways around it. I know the city of Philadelphia tried operating SEPTA buses as cooling centers, mobile cooling centers, which was fairly effective. And then you can also utilize outdoor cooling sites, which I believe the city of Richmond, Virginia has done fairly successfully, where you set up tents and basically have a block party or something like that with fans and tents and cool drinks. And that's all I have for you today. I'll drop the link to the MIT in the chat after this in case no one's done that yet. But thank you very much for your time.
Thanks so much, Adam. We have a number of questions that have arisen. Let's just start from the top. The top question, Camden and other struggling cities provide no tree maintenance services for street trees. Could RGGI money be used to develop and equip a regional workforce?
I'm not familiar with how New Jersey has decided to spend their RGGI money as of yet. As far as I know, the possibilities there, and I'm not sure if they've decided the current crop of RGGI money, but it's very possible that they could assign money to explore some sort of urban forestry ambassador program, which sounds pretty interesting.
Yeah, it sounds like that might actually be a local question too, right? It could be a parks department, which trees we're talking about.
Exactly.
Yep. The next question, with the projected warming of Philadelphia, I guess places like Arizona will not be livable. Any thoughts? So I guess the question is how, where is that? Here, it's going to get a little warmer. Are we going to get I wonder if you could say something, I guess, sort of ad lib on this question a little bit on, will people be moving here? I mean, is this going to be, relatively speaking, a more reasonable place to live than the Southwest or other places where the temperature extremes are already high?
Yeah, I think the New York Times even did an article on climate migration patterns. And, it's one of those things we don't know. I think Philadelphia is pretty well suited because we're not really going to see a whole, Amy is probably going to talk about this soon, but we'll see some sea level rise, but it's nothing like on the coast, like New York. We won't have that issue like that, or Boston. I think typically you hear more like Buffalo, New York, and like Duluth, Minnesota, places that are like really cold now, but won't be as frigid soon. But yeah, I fully expect to see some folks make their way to Philadelphia.
Here's a more general question. Does Dvrpc have the authority, have any authority to implement changes, or are you strictly providing advice?
We're pretty much strictly advisory. So I think the main teeth that we have, so to speak, is through our TIP, our Transportation Improvement Program, where we help fund projects. But otherwise, we're not regulatory in any way.
Okay. You showed a lot of maps. Do you have any that show air quality?
No, air quality is notoriously difficult to map, as the pollutants go where the wind blows, and so it's pretty hard to model. So in short, no, we don't.
Okay. Let's see, moving on. A question about the correlation between temperature and crime. Do you have any suggestions there?
I've heard there is a correlation, but I have not seen, I guess, any recent data on that or recent studies. So I can't really say anything authoritative on that.
Okay, yeah, I'm wondering, and Francesco mentions the relative cost. So Francesco, maybe you want to add a little bit more detail and we can get into the main discussion. In other words, what the relative cost of an increase in temperature on sort of damages? Is that the question? You might want to sort of put a little bit more detail there, and then we'll get into the general discussion after Amy. But we have actually two more for Adam. Boy, the questions keep coming in here.
Franco, we could also take them all at the end if we want to have Amy present now, and then we can do all Q&A at the end.
Yeah, that's fine. Does that work for you, Adam? If we
Yeah, that sounds great.
Okay, just because it's 5:05, so that would be great. So I'll get out of the way, and Amy, take it away. It's all you.
Thank you very much. All right, hi everybody. Again, I'm Amy Verbofsky, and I'm the manager of Healthy and Resilient Communities at Dvrpc. And I'm going to share with you a tool that my colleagues and I put together, the coastal effects of climate change in Southeastern PA story map. It's an interactive online tool that looks at the impact of climate change on coastal flooding along the tidal Delaware estuary in Pennsylvania. Scroll down a little bit. A little background on the story map. So Pennsylvania's Department of Environmental Protection's Coastal Resources Management Program, which is a mouthful, funded DVRPC to conduct outreach to municipalities around climate change and coastal hazards in 2017. And what we found in speaking to municipalities was that a lot of folks were thinking about flooding today. You know, they were dealing with current flooding issues. A lot of them had current flooding issues, but they weren't thinking about sea level rise in the future. They really just didn't have the capacity to be looking long-term into the future. So what we wanted to do was to put together the story map as a way to share sea level rise information with them in a way that was relevant and tailored to their communities, and hopefully something really serve as a tool that they could use in their planning documents or other kind of municipal capital programs, and whatever kind of work that they're doing. This could be a resource for them. Also, DEP staff were interested in us having or providing information on the community rating system. So the story map also illustrates the savings that can be achieved through the CRS program, and I'll talk about that kind of towards the end of the presentation. And as you can probably tell, I'm going to be doing this as a live demo, so please bear with me if things are a little slow, but hopefully it goes pretty smoothly. So the story map begins with some basic background information on climate change and flooding and the geography of the coastal zone. As you can probably see, Pennsylvania's coastal zone along in the Delaware estuary includes 29 municipalities in Delaware, Philadelphia, and Bucks counties. So it kind of scrolls through there. And then we have 5 other tabs at the top that cover different kind of sections here. And we are going to page down. So this first tab is our kind of sea level rise tab, or our projected sea level rise. And we show sea level rise under 4 different scenarios. So again, I'm going to scroll a little bit. We have present day. Hopefully this doesn't take too long. There we go. We have a 2050 sea level rise in 2050, in 2100 under a low greenhouse gas emission scenario, and 2100 under a high greenhouse gas emission scenario. And for each time period, we mapped the high tide, the 10% chance storm, and the 1% chance storm. And the 1% chance storm is also known as the 100-year storm. And it's something that many folks are familiar with from FEMA's flood maps and flood insurance programs. So, we wanted to show something that, might change in the future with sea level rise, something that was familiar to them and how that might change. Again, thinking about how to communicate with municipalities, in a way that is relatable and relevant to them. And if you're familiar with our region, you'll notice this map opens on the Philadelphia airport. And really that's because this is kind of the area within the coastal zone that's going to see the biggest impact. But you can, zoom out and pan around to the entire coastal zone up through kind of the head of tide in Bucks County. And a little bit of information on our data. So the data for these layers come from NOAA's historical tide gauge data at the Philadelphia gauge. And unlike FEMA flood maps, the layers only include the limited wave action that the tide gauge collects in its fixed position. Additionally, the maps do not include any riverine flooding. And our sea level rise estimates are based on studies conducted by Dr. Robert Kopp out of Rutgers University. He's published a number of studies. We base most of our data off of some 2014 and 2016 studies, which were titled Assessing New Jersey's Exposure to Sea Level Rise and Coastal Storms. And while the study is New Jersey based, it is the same water body. The tidal Delaware is the same water body, regardless of which state you're standing in. And the COP study provided a range of estimates for sea level rise based on probability. So for example, there's a 50% chance that sea level will rise X feet, a 10% chance that sea level will rise Y feet, and maybe 1% chance that sea level will rise Z feet. We chose the central estimate or the 50% chance for each time period and greenhouse gas emission scenario. And the full range of estimates from COP study are available in our technical analysis document, which is linked throughout the story map, and I will be sure to show at the end. So as we kind of scroll through again, the figures that we used, we want to start here. First, sea level rise were 1.4 feet in 2050, an additional 2.3 feet of sea level rise in 2100 for the low greenhouse gas emission scenario, and 3.4 feet of sea level rise in 2100s for the high greenhouse gas emission scenario. And I'm going to open up this. So we then added, to that sea level rise amount, the mean high water, which was 3.94 feet. And then we added, additional amounts for the 10% chance storm and the 1% chance storm. And as you can see in this kind of graphic here, it's an additional 3.05 feet for the 10% chance storm and an additional 4.13 feet for the 1% chance storm. So it's all kind of additive to get those total numbers. I will scroll through again a little bit. You may notice some slight changes to the map. They aren't very drastic because, again, we're seeing kind of 1 foot increase in sea level and how that impacts, the land. I think the biggest impacts you'll see really are from that 1% chance storm, which in this scenario is showing that kind of light orange yellow color. And finally, just want to point out here, within this tab, we have an Explore for Yourself map. So users can come on and turn on and off different layers as they want, just to customize it a bit. Moving on, we have a chronic inundation tab. So chronic inundation is a term that comes from the Union of Concerned Scientists and occurs when a land area is flooded about 26 times per year, which is an average of every other week. And the Union of Concerned Scientists kind of came up with this number based on speaking to a number of municipalities, and that's what they determined was the time when the land basically becomes unusable, even though it's not always underwater. It's underwater enough that it's not reasonable to continue to live there. And so we wanted to show chronic inundation because this is not as severe as some of the sea level rise scenarios we're looking at, some of the storm scenarios. But it's what municipalities may expect to see sooner if they're not already seeing it. So I will scroll down here. And the Union of Concerned Scientists were really great and shared their data with us for Philadelphia. So we've mapped chronic inundation under the 4 different sea level rise scenarios. So you can see that here. The dark blue is present day high tide. And again, it kind of, you can see what chronic inundation will look like in the future under different scenarios. And again, for this situation, we have another graphic to show again how the water levels, how we came up with those different water levels. And we have a Explore for Yourself tab. So similar to the last map, users can turn on and off different layers. And at this point, so we did this kind of initial data and shared it with some of our partners at the City of Philadelphia, and they really wanted to see the inundation data, this water sea level rise data, overlaid with infrastructure and property value data, because they thought it would make it more impactful to elected officials and residents when making the case to do something about it, to make changes, to implement some mitigation measures. So these next 2 tabs that I'm going to talk about are basic spatial overlays looking at assets like schools, roads, hospitals, emergency services, and structures. And then for the property value tab, the aggregate value of properties that may be at risk from flooding. So let's scroll down a little bit. Our analysis was done for 3 different climate change scenarios. So we chose kind of 3 that would sort of represent a best case, middle case, and worst case scenario for different sea level rise, and overlaid that with, again, in this case, this infrastructure. And so we have 2050 or chronic inundation in 2050, chronic inundation in 2100 under a high emission scenario, and then we have the 2100 high emission scenario with a 1% chance storm. And just looking at this kind of middle ground scenario, our analysis showed that 97 miles of roadway, 97 community assets, and 1,700 structures were at risk of being inundated in this given scenario. And you can click on the structures. They'll tell you a little bit about them. The green are the roadways that you can see there. But I think what's really kind of cool about these tabs are the Explore for Yourself map Hopefully it comes up here, because this layer starts to aggregate them. I'm going to scroll down. I'm going to turn on the percent of total roads at risk with 2100 high emissions scenario and a 1% chance flood. So here we're looking at kind of the most severe, I guess, scenario that we have for this map. And I'm going to click on, I believe this is Tinicum. So you can see here that almost half of Tinicum's road miles may be underwater under this given scenario. So that's pretty startling. And, folks, within the municipality may want to be thinking, PennDOT thinking about what do roads look like in the future? Where are we locating our roads? How are we going to take care of them? You can see that a lot of that kind of the more severe impact is kind of along the kind of southern edge of our coastal zone, and things get less severe as you go north in Bucks County. Okay, so the next tab is property value risk. The property value risk is very similar. It overlays the same three scenarios that I just mentioned and calculates how much of a community's assessed value may be at risk of flooding in a given scenario. So again, I'm going to kind of scroll down to this 2100 high emissions with chronic inundation. And what we found is that approximately $920 million of assessed value is at risk of flooding in this scenario within our coastal zone. So that's, again, the 29 municipalities in the coastal zone. And here, if we scroll down to the Explore for Yourself tab, so this one already comes up with the percent of total property value at risk in the 2100 high emission scenario with that 1% flood on top of it. And I'm going to click on this 19112 zip code, which is the Navy Yard. Again, if you're familiar with Philadelphia. And you can see that about 60% of the total assessed value of the Navy Yard is at risk of being inundated in this scenario. And that's an estimated value of $132 million. So that's pretty serious, 60% of property value underwater. If we come and look up at 19106, this is the zip code where DVRPC's offices are located. And only 4% of the total value of properties are at risk of being inundated in this zip code. However, the total value of properties is, almost double kind of what we're seeing in the Navy Yard. So even though it is a lighter color and it looks, the percentage is lower, there's still a pretty substantial dollar amount that's at risk in this scenario. Again, I am clicking on, the most severe scenario that we're showing in this case. So I think with that, moving on to the community rating system. So I don't know if folks are familiar with CRS, but just kind of quickly, the community rating system is a voluntary program that FEMA manages to incentivize municipalities to implement floodplain management activities that exceed the National Flood Insurance Program requirements. Municipal participation in CRS reduces flood insurance premiums for policyholders by up to 45%. Again, municipalities have to participate. They do all the work, but the policyholders, the residents that have flood insurance would see the benefit from this program. And they can save up to 45% on their flood insurance premiums, kind of depending on the level that a community achieves within CRS. And so we wanted to show municipalities what their policyholders could save so that they could gauge whether or not it's worthwhile for them to participate. We've talked to a lot of folks about CRS. There aren't many communities within our region that are participating in CRS. It is fairly burdensome to do all the paperwork and to meet the standards to participate. So we kind of wanted to help municipalities have a little bit more information when making that decision. So to start, we mapped flood insurance premiums just so folks could see on average, within the case of this map, what people are paying for flood insurance. And within the city of Philadelphia, the average premium per year is $953. And there are about 3,800 policies within the city of Philadelphia. Of course, the actual premiums, 953 is an average. The actual number varies depending on location and the type of policy folks have. As a point of comparison, Marcus Hook Borough has 4 policy holders but the average premium is about $3,000. So it's a pretty different situation for them. And then we also mapped potential savings. So folks could start to see, let's see, this one is going to be a little bit slower. Folks could start to see what they could save if they were to participate in the program. And as a bit of background, CRS has 9 classes. So municipalities enter in at class 9, and that is at a class 9 level, policyholders could save 5%. If you get up to a class 1, policyholders could save 45%. So this is just a fun little slider map that changes from class 9 to class 1. And you can see at class 9, the average savings for a policyholder in the city of Philadelphia would be $53. But if we were to go to class 1, the savings would be $450 per year. Similarly, again, looking at Marcus Hook, $146 under a class 9, and $1,200 under class 1. So just a little bit more information that municipalities can, have when making decisions to participate in the program. And then, let me get back into this. We also have this about our analysis document, which is linked within the story map. It explains all the technical details behind our methodology, where we got our sea level rise projections, some of the limitations of the overall projections. We used a bathtub model, so hydroconnectivity. Some of the areas may appear to be flooded, even though they're not necessarily connected. But there's a lot of details in here if you are curious as to kind of some of the more nitty-gritty aspects. And then I will also just note that we've been presenting the story map to many communities, many of the kind of same presentations, events that Rob's been at, we've been presenting the story map as well. Folks with the city of Philadelphia, Bucks County, the state, the Pennsylvania Environmental Council. We really want to publicize this because it's only a useful tool if folks know about it. And we are continuing to work with municipalities. We are currently partnering with the Wharton Risk Center to provide municipalities with and residents with information on financial resiliency, kind of doing a deeper dive into flood insurance and kind of working in that direction. So I think that is it for me. And I'm happy to take questions now.
Thanks so much, Amy. That mapping is amazing. What a resource for our region. There's been a whole bunch of questions. I've been trying to organize them in different ways. I guess, let's see, where do we want to start? Some of these questions, I'm not sure if they're held over from before, so I don't know if all 3 speakers want to jump on, but there were, yes, in your presentation, Amy, there were a lot of questions that sort of came up, I guess, triggered by some of the mapping adaptation strategies. So there were, questions about new development standards, cleanup of sites like the Sunoco refinery, setbacks, for example, from water bodies, moving the airport, underground housing. So I wonder, I don't know if you want to speak to any of those individual adaptation strategies or more generally about, the extent to which these tools that you've produced have sort of triggered conversation, perhaps local code changes, et cetera.
Yeah, I think so. Again, I think Adam spoke to this a little bit. I see Zoe's on. Zoe from Wharton can also speak a little bit too. But Adam spoke a little bit about kind of the limitations of Dvrpc as far as implementing changes. So I think that's an important thing to consider. We serve mostly in this respect as an advisory capacity, and the municipalities have all of the kind of land use controls. And then state bodies have more regulation as far as I guess where industries are located and how they can operate. But municipalities have those controls as far as setbacks and other things like that. So we hope that municipalities will use this information to make those changes and can guide them to model ordinances and things like that. But unfortunately, we don't have the ability to to do that ourselves. And I think there are a lot of other resources out there. It's kind of like best case for what folks like taking this information. And then if you want to go do, have it include a setback or maybe raise your base flood elevation, within your floodplain ordinance, what that could look like. We can definitely work with folks. I think when I've done this presentation, I think most folks are most intrigued by the CRS information. I don't think a lot of folks have heard of the community rating system, and being able to save money on your flood insurance is always a popular thing. So that's kind of where we've gotten the biggest response. And again, we are not FEMA, but we would work with municipalities to help put together some of the information they need to kind of a lot of the CRS programs are around public engagement or communicating some of the plans. So, DVRPC could do some of the mapping and help municipalities to achieve some of the steps to get to CRS different levels. I don't know if that was a complete answer, if Rob or Adam want to jump in as well.
Yeah, on that last point, there's someone here from Monroe County that just got a grant to hire a consultant to do some CRS education. And so that person may reach out to you, I guess, to ask more about how to access this tool and the background to it.
Okay, yeah.
I could answer the question about the airport. And this doesn't apply only to the airport, but to a lot of large infrastructure, like it would apply to the East Coast, the rail corridor, the Amtrak rail corridor, probably a little bit, to some extent to the I-95 corridor. Certainly would apply to the Boston airport, Logan Airport in Boston, and most importantly, for instance, to the city of Miami, all of which are at risk at some point, depending on how sea level rise goes, of getting of needing to move people or facilities. And it's a complicated question because you can spend money building protection, but at some point that protection will no longer be viable. I mean, for instance, if you protect a neighborhood or a building, but then eventually all the roads to that neighborhood or building are flooded, then what's the value of it? If you protect an airport with walls or by building it up, you could probably do that for quite a while, but it will be, the roads to the airport may be closed, or the people nearby may not be there because they've moved. So it's a real question, and that's one of the issues that we're looking at the Transportation Research Board's standing committee on extreme weather and climate change adaptation, is when do you stop investing in protecting and invest in transforming or actually moving something. I know that, for instance, New York City has a Newark Airport, which is at risk, LaGuardia, which is at risk, and JFK, which is at risk. But the Port Authority also owns an airport in Newburgh, New York, upstate, called the New York Stewart International Airport, which is, I think, I can't remember the elevation, but it's pretty high elevation, relatively high elevation. And it's sort of their back pocket plan to run a high-speed rail up to there and use that as an airport for the city. But it's challenging. I mean, we've talked to Philadelphia International Airport about this. They get this question a lot. I think there are those who would have thought when the Willow Grove Air Base was closed that land might have been preserved for a future airport potentially. I doubt the people in that area wanted that, but so it's a challenging question, and even more so, say, for Atlantic City's airport.
It's interesting. Your response reminds me of some conversations I had with folks in Venice, Italy, about the storm surge barrier that was recently put in there. That really, if you look at the climate change projections, is only a protection for 50 years. So you say billions and billions of euros for 50 years, but the way it was justified was the economic value, the protection of economic value in the short term justified the investment. So it's an interesting question about, even if the useful life of this doesn't extend 50 years, if the protective value of an investment now has an economic impact on the region that that exceeds that, then it could be justified. So it's a really tricky question.
Yeah, we also had a conversation with a group of real estate owners that I think was organized by someone at the University of Pennsylvania. They were not interested in protecting property from climate change because all they need to do is they're willing to hold on to the property as long as they still get a return on their investment and they have insurance, So the economic incentives are not really there. There's a great article in this morning's, I believe it was today's New York Times, about a 20-foot seawall that's being proposed in Miami, which sort of explores a lot of these issues. So if you look at today's New York Times, you'll find some things.
I wonder if we could change gears for a second. There were a couple of interesting questions saying that, all of this discussion has been about the impacts of climate change on people. What about the natural environment? What about the sort of wildlife of the region, vegetation losses? Are there considerations that I know that Dvrpc can't sort of mandate anything like that, but is adaptation discussion sort of extending to vegetation and other sources of wildlife or other wildlife?
I had typed an answer to that in the Q&A, so I'll sort of repeat that a little bit. So yeah, I mean, animals are migrating to all kinds of areas. I had noticed recently I'm a bird watcher, and I've noticed that the black vulture is showing up here, which it used to never show up here. Plants are also migrating. They move very slowly, of course, because plants don't walk. And the problem is that climate is changing faster. I can't remember, I used to know the speed at which sort of climate is moving, but it moves faster than most species can move. Certainly forest species are very challenging to move. Plants are very difficult to move at the speed that the climate is moving. If you're talking about climate change over thousands of years, that's happens, but when you're talking about climate change at the accelerated pace we're seeing, it really can't happen. I know that I put a link in the Q&A answer to this question under the answered questions. If you expand that, there's a link to a climate adaptation forum we had quite a while ago, actually almost 5 years ago, on exactly this question, and we had a speaker from both the Philadelphia Parks Department and from the Department of the Department of Conservation and Natural Resources of the Pennsylvania, talking about what actions they were taking to try to get their forests to move themselves, basically, because you can't replant the state of Pennsylvania, so you have to figure out how to help it move itself. What can do. There was some testing some species. I know the Nature Conservancy has a new strategy on for their land acquisition, that they want to acquire lands on northern slopes of elevations, so that they're likely to be the most protected areas and maintain the greatest diversity. But it's a big challenge.
I wonder, Amy, your charts were very, explained how the sea level rise projections were computed, but there was a question about land subsidence and whether, if you want to just sort of set the record straight about the extent to which land subsidence is incorporated into those projections.
I'd honestly have to go back and look at our technical analysis document, because we use the numbers from Dr. Kopp's study. So I'd have to go back and see what was in his study with regards to how their team came up with those numbers. It has been a while since we did the calculator, we did the modeling and put the story map together.
It's about half is subsidence.
Yep. Thank you. Let's see. I'm scanning questions quickly. There was some question about environmental cleanup and sort of climate change impacts there. Was that included in any of the maps? I mean, did you look at any of the more contaminated sites, and I know that this comes up in other places where the extent to which the sea level rise is going to mobilize pollutants. And I know actually CC Run, we did have a whole session on the refinery and looked at some of that. But I'm wondering if you looked in general throughout the region at the impact of climate change on some of these contaminated coastal sites.
We did not specifically look at contaminated sites within our story map. I think that was something we had talked about with different communities. And, I think it is something we could add to the story map if that's a, easily accessible GIS data set. And then it becomes kind of up to the municipalities and the state to kind of go from there as far as cleanup and the impacts of that as well. But yeah, that's, I think we, have heard that from some of the municipalities as well as we've been presenting this. So I think the great thing about a story map is it's a living tool and you can continue to evolve it as more information becomes available and people find different ways to use it as well.
There's a question for Adam here about, Adam, you mentioned the more air conditioning, the more energy consumption, the more climate change, right? So there's a sort of perverse feedback loop. And so this question is, to what extent we can avoid an increase in air conditioning through some of these other measures you talked about, like lighting, green roofs, tree planting. In other words, have you done any estimates of like how significant those types of measures are to attenuate or mitigating some of the expected heat impacts?
Yeah, certainly. So there are, I believe it's referenced in the MIT document itself, although admittedly I don't have that in front of me, so I don't have the numbers, but cool roofs definitely in the summer can reduce energy use by tens of percentage points. So there's definitely some benefit there, and green roofs are about the same. The issue being that cool roofs can actually increase heating usage in the winter, where green roofs don't really do that, which is also good. But it all just kind of depends on the climate that you're in, and what's feasible. And then, of course, if you have air conditioning and you're using renewable energy, then you're not really seeing the greenhouse gas emissions that are contributing to more global warming.
Great. Okay. Question about within your region, within the DVRPC region, how many municipalities, like percentage of the municipalities that are there, actually have climate action plans? Or like, in other words, if you're appealing to this population, how many folks have already sort of taken the message and made a plan versus are still on the fence?
I would say those that do tend to be the larger municipalities. I mean, certainly Philadelphia, which is about a third, a little less than a third of the population of the region, has a climate action plan. I believe, my township, Haverford, has one, Lower Merion has one. So I would guess that, my guess would be the state of Pennsylvania is helping. I think they've helped 8 municipalities in the region create that, including including the Montgomery County Consortium of Communities, which I think is 55 municipalities. So by the end of this year, on the Pennsylvania side, at least of our region, those 5 counties, I would guess that probably rough guess would be 75% of the population will live in a municipality that has a climate action plan. New Jersey has, they have a lot more state level work going on, and they have Sustainable Jersey, which is working with a lot of municipalities. We sort of leave the municipal work in New Jersey on climate up to Sustainable Jersey. So I don't have as good of a climate action planning up to them. I don't have as good of a pulse on that, but it's at least the same. I would guess it's around the same number. Now, having a plan is not the same as having action, but at least it's moving into consciousness. Adam, you look like you're ready to say something.
Yeah, I was going to say, we also have 352 municipalities in our region that vary in size from very, very small to very, very large. So I'm a big fan of like the county action plans, where the municipalities can sort of like plug and play into it, because that allows for a lot more broader reach and a lot more standardization on a lot of the efforts as well.
Just curious on those plans that do exist, the 75%, can you generalize about adaptation versus mitigation? I mean, are they mainly one or the other, or how many of them are comprehensive and address both reduction in emissions as well as adapting to risks?
I would say people are really want to take action to prevent climate change from happening. So there's a lot more work on mitigation at the ones that are sort of run by the environmental advisory committees. I'd say the municipalities and the counties are much more interested in thinking about adaptation. It's a little more, little less optimistic, but I think it's also essential, particularly for keeping trees planted correctly, which sort of handles both mitigation and adaptation, and also preparing for stormwater and preventing people's houses from being flooded. This both need to be taken. A lot of the adaptation actions have immediate local effect, whereas the reducing of greenhouse gas emissions doesn't have an immediate local effect. So it needs to be done more on a national or international level to be effective. So you can actually see quicker responses if you turn replace a bridge so that the roadway no longer gets flooded.
Yeah, I'll also add that a lot of the adaptation stuff can be sort of snuck into hazard mitigation plans. It's like future conditions. I know during some less friendly administrations, that was the case where they called it future conditions and hazard mitigation. So a lot of that gets snuck in, not necessarily into a climate action plan, but in other creative ways.
I was going to say a lot of our counties are currently updating their hazard mitigation plans, and I think are being more intentional about including some climate change scenarios and considerations in the hazard mitigation plans this time around.
And do those span multiple risks?
Yes, they're all hazards.
Yeah.
Those
All
are
hazards.
yeah.
The same is occurring with the state's climate action plan, state of Pennsylvania's climate action plan, which is going to be published next month, I believe. It has it has a section on adaptation that was not there before.
There was a question, I think, inspired by Adam's response to the previous question before about more people moving into the region. So if that causes more development and therefore more vegetation loss, are there controls in place? I mean, of course, we know that there are wetland protections in place nationally, but are there controls in place for sort of urban forest preservation, just given the value of trees for sequestering carbon?
Sure, yeah, I mean, especially in our region, there's, like Amy mentioned, there's a lot of local land use control. Some other states across the country have more county level control or more state level control, depending, but for us, it's usually at the local government level, and depending on the local government, you do see regulations on new constructions that require any trees felled to be replaced somewhere else within the municipality. Although there's some argument there that that's not necessarily good enough, because mature trees have a lot more benefits than newly planted trees, and it takes decades for them to get back to where they were before. But there are also shade tree commissions in certain communities. I know with some of my solar work, there was always that contention between trees versus solar power and which one's more important for the environment. So some communities have shade tree commissions that sort of review applications for tree removal, and then they'll tell you whether or not they'll allow it and give you the permit for it. Things like that.
Great.
So they exist, but it's ad hoc, so to speak.
Yeah, so I guess there's assurance that we have that we're not, regionally, even if we become climate smart in terms of the way we develop, that our regional emissions net sequestration versus emissions are necessarily going to be controlled. So another question here from Russ about your role sort of as a boundary organization. You're regional government. So what strategies have you found to kind of integrate this larger sort of federal government policy, state policy with the local or the county action? I imagine you find yourselves in that sort of brokering role in between them very often. Do you want to say anything about sort of the opportunities or challenges there and sort of operating between scales?
I'll say something since we've done, Adam and I have participated a lot in providing data for local climate action planning. And even this morning, we were on a call trying to coordinate the way certain aspects of that are coordinated across municipalities in the state of New Jersey. We have some standard methodologies that make things easier and can save people a lot of time. There are also some sort of, and that's one thing. We also, I'm involved with the state climate adaptation, climate change advisory committee for the state's climate action plan. So I try to bring that level of that information to regional plans and local plans in Montgomery County. As I noted, this Montgomery County Consortium of Communities is trying to get their communities to work together on a single climate action plan for the county, because the municipalities differ a little bit, but the things you need to do, improve transit, reduce energy use, get cleaner energy, are pretty consistent among the municipalities in our region. And we try to do as much as we can to share. I'm setting up a ad hoc quarterly meeting with essentially the sustainability directors of those 4 counties to sort of share information and planning with each other and see how we can support them. I mean, the thing is, the more people can implement rather than plan, the better. So the more the planning can be done cooperatively among the counties and then brought down to the municipalities to sort of do the implementation, I think is, it doesn't help for 352 municipalities to each figure out, spend a year and then figure out, oh, we need to make biking easier in our community. So so we try to, and Dvrpc has a lot of resources, and it's really challenging to get that information out to those who can actually implement it. It's just with so many municipalities, it's just challenging. So we try to do what we can to get the word out. In fact, we have a new deputy executive director coming on board shortly, and one of her goals is to move more towards implementation as an agency. So, which is challenging, but important.
Yeah. Well, I think we have addressed most of the questions. That was seeing 23 answered questions. That was a tribute to you all. That inspired quite a bit of dialogue. Any sort of final sort of closing thoughts you want to share with us? Any of you?
I guess I'll echo something that Rob said, which is just that, this is a global national problem, climate change, but there's a lot of things that we can do at the local level that provide livability improvements that also sort of attack that global issue. So more transit, more walkability, more bikeability, more trees and vegetation, less energy use, that helps our personal economics. There's a lot of stuff that we can do locally that has an effect globally that will just improve livability for everybody in our region.
Right. Yeah. When you're talking about shade or shaded parks in a municipality, the reason most people will support those is because they provide shaded parks for them to visit, not because it will sequester carbon. So you have to know who your audience is. Similarly, a business will spend money on a white roof and energy efficiency because it saves, if it saves them money, they'll do it. They may, depending on the business, they may also talk about how that gives them a high Energy Star rating and lowers their emissions. But if it doesn't also fit with their other economic goals, they're less likely to do it. So we're really careful when we talk to our different audiences about what it is that audience is looking to do. So if you're trying to make an area more walkable for the people who live there, that's great. The fact that it keeps cars off the road and reduces greenhouse gas emissions, the people who live there whose walking is improved, whose pedestrian facilities are improved and the crosswalks are better, that's probably low on their list of what they care about in getting that sidewalk fixed and that crosswalk to have a longer walk light, and the bike lanes to be built, and the transit to come every 15 minutes rather than every 25 minutes,
Yeah. So Amy, to get the last word, I just want to ask you a prompt. Any chance that I know that mapping was all PADEP, but any chance that or any plans to kind of work in New Jersey to do similar set of mapping?
We did think about it. We had some discussions with folks from New Jersey, but what we kind of ultimately decided is that there's a lot of really great mapping resources out there, Climate Central, some other folks that have done similar things. And so we decided that it would kind of be duplicative for us to also do this in New Jersey. I mean, I think we definitely would if it wasn't already out there. So I think if there are folks in New Jersey that are looking for this, we can point you in directions of a lot of great resources as well that have a lot of the same data. We just didn't want to reinvent the wheel there.
That's great. Okay, well, I just want to thank the three of you. This has been a really tremendous presentation, a whole lot of good information, and we got a great discussion out of it. So thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you for having us.
And we will see you all. We have a great summer, everybody. We are taking the summer off. Corinne, we will not have July and August. Yes.
Taking a little break. See you in September.
Yeah. See you in the fall.
All right, great.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Okay. Bye-bye.